That's it. Good to go.
Okay, thanks, Karina. Thank you, members, officers. Welcome to our Policy and Resources Committee tonight. We have 13 items on our agenda for this evening. Just to start off with, this is a remote meeting of the Council. It is being streamed live onto the Council's YouTube. The Council is not currently monitoring or able to moderate any of the comment section on the Council's YouTube page. So if you are using it, please do so considerately. We are going to look to get through as many of our items as quickly as we can. One of the things I do just want to alert members to is that we have agenda item 9, which is looking at the emergency planning and business continuity around COVID. We have a representative of Essex County Council on the call. So I am proposing that we will move this up the agenda and we'll deal with that after the subcommittee minutes. And Pete McKenzie from Basildon Council is also here to talk on that item, which we'll say more about in a moment. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. We look like a full house of standing committee members this evening, so there are no apologies for absence. Does any member have a declaration of interest? Councillor Headley.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 8 under 2.6, page 75. It mentions early access to pensions. I sit on the pensions board for Essex.
Okay, thank you.
I believe we administer that pension fund.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Items 8, 9 and 10 as a member of Essex County Council.
Okay, thank you. Any other further declarations from members? No. Okay, thank you, members. Agenda item 3 are the minutes of the meetings that we held on the 16th and the 24th of September. Are there any matters arising from the minutes that members wish to raise? In which case, can I ask members to unmute themselves and we'll take a vote. Councillor Smith on the minutes.
In favour.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor McGurran.
In favour.
Councillor Baggott.
For.
Councillor Headley.
For.
Councillor Sullivan.
For.
And I vote in favour, so that's carried. Members, thank you. Agenda item 4, the subcommittee minutes, meetings of the Staffing Matters and Review Subcommittee held on the 16th of June, 7th of July, 18th of August, 22nd of September, and the Commercialisation of Future Finance Subcommittee of this parent committee held on the 2nd of July, 30th of July, 12th of August. Are there any matters arising from any of those sets of minutes from members? In which case, I'll ask you to unmute yourselves again. Councillor Smith, how do you vote? Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, Chairman, these are just for noting. We don't need to take a formal vote.
All right, fine, fair enough. That brings us then to the bumped up agenda item 9, which is the emergency planning, business continuity overview and current activity. Members, I was on a call with the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister a few weeks ago now, where they were talking about looking at the COVID response and obviously preparing for winter with the winter pressures that councils routinely face anyway. We're relatively lucky in Basildon in the sense that flooding does not tend to be a huge issue in our part of the world, but of course that we can never say never. But it was the Secretary of State was very keen for councils to be reviewing all of their emergency and business continuity plans. And I felt that it was appropriate for this to come before members and to give this committee an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have. So this is obviously focused predominantly on COVID and the local outbreak response to the pandemic, but clearly members may have questions about how this will impact on other areas of the council's business as usual, if you like, as we move into the winter months. So I'm going to hand over to Pete, I think, am I to talk through? Yeah, Rachel's nodding at me. I can't see everyone on the screen at once. So I'm going to hand over to Pete to introduce this item, and then if Rachel wants to add anything, and I'll open it up to members. It is just to note and acknowledge, but hopefully members, you can get your questions answered, and we'll give peace of mind to those members of the public who are watching. So over to you, Pete.
Good evening. The Civil Contingency Act delivers a single framework for civil protection in the United Kingdom. Basildon Borough Council is defined as a Category 1 responder under the Act, which places a duty on all local authorities to have plans in place to be able to respond to an emergency incident. This report sets out the overview of the standing integrated emergency management procedures in place, how these have been enacted for the current prolonged incident, and the preparedness in place for a concurrent incident. Should be noted that this report was prepared prior to the government's new tier system of guidance and restrictions announced on the 12th of October, and provides an overview of the structures and arrangements in place that facilitate the response. Emergency planning predominantly involves the council's response to incidents that happen externally to the organisation, where business continuity is concerned with keeping the provision of council services running during an incident. The extensive plans in place form part of and complement multi-agency plans that are coordinated through the Local Resilience Forum. Local Resilience Forums are statutory multi-agency partnerships made up of representatives from local public services, including emergency services, local authorities, NHS, Environment Agency, and many others. The Essex Resilience Forum covers the geographic area of Essex and aims to plan and prepare for localised incidents and catastrophic emergencies. They work to identify potential risks and produce emergency plans to either prevent or mitigate the impact of any incident. These plans and structures have been activated for a number of months in response to COVID-19, and Basildon Council continues to be part of the wider combined Essex activities. All of our plans are in a continuous cycle of review and exercise to ensure they remain current, appropriate, and understood by those involved. In short, Basildon Council have plans and procedures in place to allow it to respond in and out of hours to a major emergency incident. At the moment, the Council's emergency response resources and management structures are activated and are primarily focused on the ongoing response to and recovery from COVID-19. It's also in a position and has resources in place to respond to a concurrent incident, as can be witnessed by the recent Queen's Park Court and Appleford Court incidents. However, a prolonged concurrent incident may need additional investment in resources. And at this point, I'd just like to hand over to Rachel Glover, Environmental Health Services Manager, to talk about the local plans.
Thank you, Pete. I won't go through it in too much detail, but really just to provide a brief overview of the local outbreak response, which is largely led by county with the input of multi-agency approach with the NHS, CCGs, the police, environmental health and others. And I'd like to say thank you for Danny Showell, who's the public health consultant from Essex County Council, who's here with us tonight, who may be able to answer some additional questions that members may have, because I appreciate there's been a lot of change actually since this report was written. So an outbreak control plan has been produced and led by Essex. So it's, as I say, it's a multi-agency approach to dealing with the rising the issues of local concern with COVID, and particularly to focus on monitoring of trends and also responding to the pattern of COVID. From an environmental health point of view, we are members of the Local Outbreak Engagement Board, which meets weekly and communicates practically daily on the trends, but also supports the investigation excuse me, of outbreaks, particularly in workplaces. That tends to be our main focus. So if anything's picked up through the test and trace process, that gets referred on to us, and we will liaise with the business to make sure that they have appropriate precautions in place. It's being refined all the time. We are also undertaking other activities with our colleagues in the police. We now have the Enforcement Tactical Coordinating Group has been reactivated in the past few weeks with a view to making sure that we've got the appropriate resources in place and shared across Essex in our approach to dealing with COVID contraventions. So that's really all I wanted to summarise from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Rachel. At this point, I don't know, Danny, who's joined us from Essex County Council, I don't know if you wish to add anything, Danny, at this point.
I'm happy to answer any questions. I could give a quick background as to the situation that we find ourselves in as far as COVID goes, if that would be helpful, though I think it's probably well known to people. Well,
I think it's worth putting it on the record. We obviously have moved up a tier, which we know, and the figures that are being released on a daily basis, I think it's important that people fully understand what they mean and the infection rates, etc. So if you could just give a brief overview, that would be helpful, I think, for the committee and the watching public.
Certainly. So the levels in the east of England are below the national average. As far as the east of England goes, Essex is about the middle of the pack. So there are areas that are ahead of us in their COVID experience and areas that are lagging behind us. So the actual absolute numbers of COVID within Essex, any part, including Basildon, were not alarmingly high. The thing that is alarming is the rise, and we've hit the stage of exponential rise, so that it's a multiplicative factor. And if you look at 4 weeks ago, the levels that we have now would have been the levels they're having in the northwest of England, the very highest levels. So it's only a matter of time before this ran away and was out of control. What can we do about that? We have limited things that we can do actually within Essex, the contact tracing that Rachel is a part of, and that finding people who are tested positive, finding their contacts and helping them to isolate so they don't spread it. So that work is ongoing. But outside of that, and just the messages to the general public, there's not much else that we can do until we went into this high local COVID alert level, which then means that we stipulate that mixing within households is prohibited. Which then stops people sharing it amongst multiple households. And it's just that breaking that network of connections that then means that the infection won't continue to rise in such a high rate, and pushing the message to work from home if you possibly can, which means that people then don't pick it up occupationally. So those are the things we wanted to bring in, and it's going to take some time before we can see those being effective. But we hope that will stem the worst of the increases. So that's the situation we're in. It's not a good picture to be in, but I think that proactive stance means that we are less likely to get the severe problems that we would otherwise have ended up with.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Paul Birkinshaw, is there anything at this stage you would like to add before I open this up to members' questions?
No, nothing to add to what Pete said. I think just to put on record, certainly to the work that Pete and John have done in emergency planning and business continuity, both in terms of this has been ongoing for quite some time, of course, and we've had a couple of incidents in addition which have been managed, but also planning for further ones as well. So I think a number of people have undertaken some great work, and Rachel obviously as well to undertake a huge amount. But I suppose just from my perspective, just on the public record, thank Pete and John for the work they've done, which is briefly touched upon in the report, but obviously includes a huge amount. And when we continue to very actively participate in the Essex Resilience Forum, and obviously that's the key mechanism through which we deal with this, and also in collaboration through the Outbreak Board, which has just been mentioned, but nothing specific, Chairman, except for those points. Okay, thank you. And we would, I'm sure, echo our thanks to Pete and Rachel and the team for everything that they have done. Members, I'm opening this up for questions. So if you'd like to raise your hand, I will come to you. Councillor Baggott first.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm caveating what I'm going to say, because I'm always wary that when you talk about an experience or something you've heard from 2 or 3 people, that isn't necessarily across the board. But I had an incident today where I was talking to a chap who was distraught at his work. And it's not COVID, it's also the fear of COVID, because what had happened was his company had recently issued a directive to all staff that they had to inform their senior managers, even if they've got a sniffle or a cold. So he did that and got an email back almost straight away saying, we're going to be replacing you. You need, unless you can get a test, you need to now go and self-isolate for 10 days and you'll be on SSP. And statutory sick pay for himself isn't going to pay the bills. And the point I raised with him, I said, well, surely, have you got a temperature? Well, I'm not too sure. I said, have you got loss of taste? No. Have you got a persistent cough? No. So it didn't fit the criteria, but it didn't matter because the company is in retail. They were taking a little bit of a firmer stance, and you can understand the thinking. They don't want to be putting staff that are then potentially infecting members of the public. And it did occur to me, and this is why I say I'm very wary about when it's just one isolated incident as to whether it is. But obviously, this is a large company; they're a chain, and therefore this applies beyond. In the same way that we have in a lot of high streets and areas defibrillators, whether there's any at all, because this is going to increase as people get colds, as children are going to school and mixing it. Whether there's any way of maybe having the Zappa, what are they called? Thermometers that are being used in schools and places like that, where they could be put in various public places or used as a way for people to get at least a temperature test that they can sanction to prevent themselves being put in a position of falsely going into self-isolation, because some companies are taking a different view to how to respond to people that are currently now coming down with colds and coughing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baggett. Does Rachel or Danny want to come back on the points around in-place work?
Danny, do you want to just provide some advice on the infection side, on the COVID itself?
Yes, so the point is well made that that's inappropriate action by an employer, that it's not a good sign that the person has COVID. It's almost certainly another respiratory illness. As you say, as we get into the winter, when other respiratory illnesses are ever more common, then that's going to be the vast majority of people with those just sniffles are going to be non-COVID. You can only, unless you're fraudulent as a member of the public, you can only get a COVID test if you have one of those three symptoms that you mentioned: the fever, the new continuous cough, or the loss of sense of smell or sense of taste. So the person couldn't actually, unless they're fraudulent, get hold of a test. And so it's a completely inappropriate response. As far as I don't want to respond too much on the temperature and the using the gun, having that in a public place, because I think any innovation is worth thinking about for a while. But my initial responses would be, we have to be careful that we don't want to bring in something to appease an employer that is actually not understanding the rules and maybe being too anxious, because that can then just lead to further anxiety. And there can be the problem of people think, well, I haven't got a fever, therefore I can't have COVID, is a danger, when of course, especially in adults, that's a relatively rare symptom compared to the others, and is more common in children. So it's a good point, and we'll certainly think about that.
Can I just come back on the specific company then? I think if it's a communication issue, even if it's a national company, then I think it's appropriate that we have that communication, because I think there's the mixed messaging there to the member of staff is report it if you think you're ill, but we're not going to pay you if you are. So which again potentially has an unfortunate effect of possibly putting people under the radar because they don't want to lose their money. So I'm happy to have that conversation offline with you, Councillor.
Yeah, no, and thank you. Thanks for the response.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that since the Staffing Matter Subcommittee considered the discretionary pots and the statutory pots for test and trace payments as well, that the council has been administering those. Rob Mance's team have been doing that, so we need to get those messages out as well to the public. I think just picking up on a couple of points, if I can there, I think we need to clarify this thing about because obviously the public trust and confidence in the messaging is very, very low at this moment in time. You've only got a cursory look for a couple of minutes on social media to see that, and I think that the messaging over the last sort of 10 days in Essex has not been handled very effectively at all. And I did make that point to fellow leaders and chief executives on Friday, and we all have to hold our hands up to that. But I think Mike Gogarty, the Director of Public Health, made the point around a month ago that he showed a comparison with Australia and what happened in Australia throughout their winter months, which is that flu effectively died. That if you had some of these symptoms, it was likely, because of the social distancing measures and everything else, that it was coronavirus. And I think we need to be clear about that, and we need to get some understanding from the Director of Public Health around what he is envisaging. Is flu less contagious than coronavirus, and therefore the social distancing measures that we are all going through in Essex would offset some of that, and therefore it is likely to be more dangerous, and it is likely to be COVID if you're experiencing some of those symptoms. I think we need to be clear on it. And the second thing around, I personally think we've got to be careful about this use of language around fraudulent testing. I mean, here is the problem. We are not testing anywhere near enough people in this country at this moment in time. And quite possibly there are large numbers of people who are asymptomatic, who are out and about spreading the virus. And, just because you have got some of these symptoms, you can still have coronavirus, as I understand it, without them. So, I just think we've got to be careful on it. We've got to massively ramp up testing in this country over the months ahead if we're going to get on top of it. So I think we need to get some clarifications from Mike Gogarty further down the line. Danny, you want to come back?
Yeah, just two things. So I did use the term fraudulent deliberately, because you have to, in order to order the tests, you have to say what symptoms you have. So you have to put in symptoms you don't have in order to get the test. But I take your point 100%. What we need is many more tests. So it wouldn't matter. Anybody who wanted to have a test, they felt that a bit sniffled or whatever, they could have it. We're not in that position yet. So you're right. We definitely do have to ramp up the amount of testing that is available. And we're hoping that with all the social distancing and so on, most respiratory viruses will be less prevalent this year than they were previous seasons.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. So I understand that the report in front of us is primarily about how we deal with the pandemic and the business continuity addressing that, but it also does mention about we need to look at the preparedness for a concurrent incident, i.e. the normal BAU business continuity. The report, as it says, provides an overview of the structures and arrangements in place to facilitate response to that sort of business continuity issue. But my question is, do members ever actually get to look at the business continuity plans themselves? We're getting an overview, and I don't think this committee could look in depth at the business continuity plans. But to give you an example, when I first became cabinet member about 10 years ago now, I actually instigated a business continuity plan if the Basildon Centre become inaccessible. So say there's a fire at the Basildon Centre or an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease, that would mean that no one could get in or out of the Basildon Centre. But of course, lots of members of the public come into the Basildon Centre for various different services. So I felt that we needed to have a specific business continuity plan for that specific eventuality. So as I said, that was about 10 years ago. So it's really a question, I think, for the officers. When are these business continuity plans reviewed? Are they reviewed by members? I mean, as I said, I don't think it's for this committee, but probably something like audit and risk. Is that something that actually takes place? Because obviously these things need to be updated and renewed and everything, or even new ones started and old ones discarded. So what is the process for that, for the specific plans, if someone could answer, please?
Thank you. Pete.
Yes, thank you. So the actual business continuity arrangements goes to the Audit and Risk Working Group, and it's also reported through the annual assurance statement. The policy and strategy is signed by a member and part of the member committees. The plans themselves are reviewed annually at least, and on change and any major changes to tasking, etc. During this period, we've been on a continuous review of business continuity plans. We've implemented business continuity plans at the beginning of the outbreak and at the start of the lockdown, and service managers continually reviewed through that period as we brought services back online. But normally it would be at least an annual review of every business continuity plan. And at the same time, we look at services that don't have a business continuity plan to see if they need one at that moment in time.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, so you just said that they're reviewed annually. Does the results of that review go to members at any point? Does it go to audit and risk, for instance?
As I said, through the Audit and Risk Working Group, it's reported through there and through the annual governance statement.
Okay, thank you. and I know from my experience as leader, Pete's team have briefed me on things like high profile senior figure deaths, etc., and what would happen. So I'm sure that was the case for previous leaders of the council as well. So that is in place. Does any other member wish to ask questions of Rachel, Danny, or Pete on this item? Paul, you've come on screen. Do you want to talk? Sorry.
Just an answer to question, just to raise one point, Chairman. I'll let Councillor McGurran go first and let me just come at the end.
Okay, Councillor McGurran.
Thanks very much. Just a quick question, really. As Gavin already alluded to, we obviously had to go into Tier 3 quite quickly. Not an easy decision for anyone involved, I would have thought, certainly some of us. But I was earlier this week in a meeting with Councillor Ball and many others with the hospitality industry from around Essex. They were, perhaps not surprisingly, not best pleased. And one of the things that struck me was that albeit the decision was taken quickly, again, as Gavin sort of alluded to, there wasn't a huge amount of communication, and I think we need to work harder on that collectively. And what I would say to the various officers involved is, and I hope we don't have to do this, but unfortunately the indications are it might come at some point, if we were to have to move to Tier 3, would we have longer to realise that, and B, therefore could we have a bit more time to communicate with really struggling sectors of the economy like the hospitality sector, to A, make sure they're aware of what's going on, and B, find ways of helping them through it as far as it's possible to do so.
I think that's a good point. And before I bring any officer in, I would just add that we were under the impression when the first conversations happened around going into Tier 2, we were under the impression that it would be a 7 to 10 day lead-in time to enable councils to get their ducks lined up in a row. I think Matt Hancock's statement came as a shock to most people, that he gave us 48 hours to turn it around. So I think that didn't help. But even so, it was still a week on from when initial discussions were happening. And I think we could have potentially been more lined up. But I think we are at the mercy, unless any officer corrects me, I think we are at the mercy of government diktat when it comes to timings. I don't think we have an opportunity to make representations on that. They will decide when the guillotine, if you like, comes down on any particular area. I'm not sure if any officer has anything else to add on that. In which case, Paul, I'll come back to you for your part, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, just in closing, and thanks members' contributions. I think it's implicit, Pete mentioned it, and it is referenced on the report, but I think it's just to make it a little more explicit. And I think the context and one of the reasons you asked for this report to come was around the potential for concurrent incidents and how that could stretch our capacity over the winter, not only in COVID, but if any of those issues arise. That's obviously relevant to the Resilience Forum as well, who are doing a lot of planning around that to ensure that there's that capacity, and all agencies as part of that will be doing likewise, and that does include ourselves. But I think it's just reminding the context, making it a bit more explicit, that there's the potential obviously for capacity to be taken if there's concurrent incidents and if the COVID ramps up even further. So I just wanted to kind of, I think it is implicit in any members' minds, but just to draw that to your attention. Obviously we'll come back as necessary if and as necessary as things progress.
Yeah. Okay. I think you muted yourself then before you finished. Okay. Yes, that is absolutely right. And clearly, if we do have any other incidents, then we need to move quickly. But I think the good news is that the business continuity plans that are in place are demonstrating that they are working, and it's a huge effort. And I think it's fair to say our officers are going above and beyond what was in the job description to get this stuff done. So a huge thank you, Pete, Rachel, and Danny, for your time. You are welcome if you want to stay and listen to the remainder of our deliberations, but otherwise thank you all for your time this evening. Members, that is just a report to note, so thank you for your contributions to that. Agenda item 5 is the work programme. We'll deal with that now. That's on page 45 of your agendas. We are asked to vote on this and consider and endorse it. Does any member have any items that they wish to add to the report or to take off. Councillor Smith.
Sorry, it's just looking for me. But yes, I wondered if you could put it on the work programme. Some time ago, Basildon Fire Station lost its aerial ladder platform with another 3 floors going on Trafford House, the existing flats and the proposed flats. I think it would make sense for Basildon Fire Station to have its aerial ladder platform restored, but I think it would be good advice if on the work programme we spoke to the Essex Police Fire Commissioner and the Essex Fire Brigade Union to get their view.
Okay, thank you. We can add that in. Does any other member have any other item? No, in which case I'd ask you to unmute yourselves because we do need to take a vote on the work programme.
Councillor Headley's waving at you.
Oh, Councillor Headley, over to you. You're on mute.
On the point just made by Councillor Smith, there are aerial ladder platforms both at Rayleigh Weir, and also, and originally there were 5 in Essex. They're not particularly useful for buildings of the height that Councillor Smith is talking about. They're not used as an escape platform. And I really do think you should leave it to the fire service to articulate their plans and the deployment of aerial ladder platforms. They can get aerial ladder platforms to any incident within about 10 minutes. So, and certainly from Alsett, they would be in Basildon almost as quickly as they would be if they had one at Basildon. And when they've needed them in Basildon, they've always been there. So I don't think we need to waste our time on telling the fire service how to run their own sticks. Thank you.
Okay, I think the connection, well, certainly my connection there went a bit funny, so I caught most of that. But I think the point is that asking the fire service to come and tell us what they need rather than the other way around. So it's always useful to hold elected representatives like the PFCC or whatever he's called now to account, and that was a prime opportunity, I think, for this committee to be able to do that. Are there any other items that members want to add onto the work programme? I'm not hearing or seeing anybody waving at me, in which case I'll ask members to unmute themselves and I will ask Councillor Smith, how do you vote on the work programme?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGarren?
In favour.
Councillor Baggott?
Against.
Councillor Headley?
Against.
Councillor Sullivan?
Against.
Madness. And I vote in favour of the recommendation. So the recommendation is carried. Agenda item 6 is the appointment to outside bodies on page 49. There is an error on this, which I do need to correct, which is in relation to the 2nd and 3rd appointments, which currently say Councillor Brown. They should say Councillor Ferguson. Does any member wish to shock? Councillor Baggott.
I know, I appreciate you might be shocked that the opposition has things to say and doesn't agree with everything that comes out of your mouth. I yet again note that the so-called alliance of providing transparency and fairness across all members of the council excludes the largest political body on the council, and that this is yet another example of that. I am looking to move an amendment for which I do have a seconder. And the amendment is reading down on the appointments. On the A127 Task Force, Councillor Moore. On the Coastal Forum and Flood Partnership Board, Councillor Rimmer. On Basildon Dementia Action Alliance, Councillor Henry. On the Council Health and Wellbeing Forum, Councillor Sargent. And on the Essex Child and Family Wellbeing Advisory Board, Councillor Morris D.
Okay, thank you. I just assume, given that we haven't got any questions after 10 months at full council tomorrow night, that you agreed with everything the administration was doing, but I agree. Perhaps that's not the case. So we've got an amendment.
If the administration, having had 9 months to organise a council meeting, had managed to get its ducks in a row to be able to allow members to get the questions in, I promise you there would have been a raft. But as it was even this week that it was still being debated and decided how council was going to run, that option wasn't available to us.
You've been in every single meeting about how full councils would run since March of this year. There's an amendment on the table, so I'll ask members to unmute themselves as we vote on the amendment. I'll kick things off. I'll take the amendment on block, I should say. I will vote against the amendment. Councillor Smith.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, who was seconding the amendment?
Oh, very good point. I assume you have a second to Councillor Baggott. Councillor Sullivan's waving. Councillor Sullivan is seconding. So we have a moved and seconded amendment. I vote against. Councillor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor McGarren.
Against.
Councillor Baggott.
No surprises there. For.
Councillor Headley.
For.
Councillor Sullivan.
For.
Thank you. The amendment is lost. So the recommendation, if there's no further comments on the report, the recommendation as just corrected with the two from Councillor Brown to Councillor Ferguson, the recommendation on the order paper on page 49, I vote in favour. Councillor Smith.
In favour.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor McGarren.
In favour.
Councillor Baggott.
Against.
Councillor Headley. Please unmute yourselves. Councillor Headley.
Against.
Councillor Sullivan.
Against.
Thank you. The motion is carried. Agenda item 7 is the budget consultation exercise for 21-22. It is set out on pages 53 to 63 of your reports. I just point out to members, as we've just seen on the work programme, the draft service committee budget will come to this committee at our December meeting. This is simply an update for this committee as we begin to prepare the budget for next year on the consultation exercise that has been undertaken over the summer. And I'm going to ask Owen to present the report. Owen?
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the 2021-22 budget consultation process and the results. Purpose of the exercise, secure views and opinions from the community that inform decision-making process in respect of budget setting, as said, leading to next year's process. The consultation followed the same format as last year, so members will remember an online survey supported by contextual information and communications plan. And again, customer contact centre was available to provide assisted participation for folks who didn't have access to digital formats. It was the highest ever level of engagement this year. We received 810 completed surveys compared to 596 last year, so that's a really good result. And the key finds survey, they're set on pages 55 to 56, and these show the highest response rates where participants were asked to indicate which services they felt the council could spend less, the same or more, which statements concerning council activities are most important to them, and which statements best represented their view on setting the council tax for 2021-22. And the full consultation response is set out in enclosure 1 from page 59. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Owen. Members, open this up to debate. Councillor Baggott.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just sort of point out yet again, you've now, this administration, taking reports to be noted on this officer-led council to 89% of all reports going to committees are purely for noting. I'm very pleased with page 55 to see that the residents appreciated that when we're in administration that we put extra police out there for them and that that was recognised by the public. What I do find quite surprising, though, is that, and this is something that we had issues with, and I know that council has, irrespective to who's in charge, really getting far more engagement from residents as to the response rate, because whatever one might think, when you look at the size of the residents within the borough, the amount of people that have responded is actually pretty poor. And not a very good litmus test to be making budget decisions against that small amount of people that have responded. And we really, really need, I think, irrespective to political ideology, start thinking about how it is that we can really engage the public. Because at the end of the day, they give us their counter tax to be spent for their benefit. And if only a small minority are feeding into that, then there is an element of failure collectively to represent the residents in the way that we would like to.
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. Any other member on the budget consultation? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to make the same point as Councillor Baggott about the police, but I would just add to that that it says on the report at the top of page 56, should be noted these 5 priority areas for residents are related to policing and education, not within the direct remit of the council. As Councillor Baggott has just pointed out, in fact, we made it our remit to do that. But in addition to which, just on the other point that Councillor Baggott made about the participation rate, I do remember a few years ago, again when I was cabinet member, we were conducting a public consultation exercise, and I can't remember what it was for, but the chief executive, if he's on might recall it, because I did it in conjunction with him in his former role. And we was doing a consultation on something, and it wasn't something that we thought would get a particularly large amount of public interest. So what we did, we said that everyone who entered the consultation will get a £50 Marks and Spencer voucher. Marks and Spencer's being open then. And lo and behold, we did have a much better response rate to the consultation than we was expecting. So I don't know if the chief executive's on or he can remember that, but perhaps that might be the way to go to up the response rates in this, or indeed any other public consultation that we conduct.
Okay, Councillor, thank you for that. When the budget does come, we will see significant financial pressures on the council, given that we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. And handing out M&S vouchers, I'm not sure is something that we have the capacity or the money to do. But I take the point, and I take the point from Councillor Baggott that clearly we want to see an increased level of engagement, and we want to see that it's going in the right direction, and nudging towards the 1,000 mark, but it is still not, I would suggest, anywhere near good enough, and we need to do more. And I don't know what the magic silver bullet is for this. I think we've all racked our brains on this for some time, but clearly the public who have responded have set out a clear path for what they would like to see happen in the budget, and we will look to bring that forward in the December meeting of PNR, and members will have an opportunity to influence it before the final budget comes back in January. Councillor Headley.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a relatively small point, but I found it quite interesting that when the theatre was mentioned, just over 50% wanted us to spend less. Only 7.7% wanted us to spend more. Given the amount of lobbying the arts and creative elements within the community want to see that increased, there's a disappointingly high number that want to spend less. And given that the future plans for the town centre are to include things like an arena, I think that we have some way to go on those figures before we can convince the public that spending money on arts and entertainment, the public money on arts and entertainment, is a good idea. As it happens, I support the theatre. In fact, it was under a Conservative administration that I was the cabinet member at the time when we reopened the Towngate Theatre. And I think it's a shame that we haven't got a bigger proportion of our residents on board with supporting the arts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. I think part of the issue, as we know, and we will debate this as we go forward, is that the theatre in its current guise is not big enough to take some of the larger shows that many people in our borough would like to see, and as a consequence it falls foul of perhaps some of the larger audiences that the Cliffs and other local, the Queen's Theatre in Hornchurch and others that are able to get. So clearly that is part of the thinking as we look at the regeneration as to how we can improve that and increase it. And clearly, as well as has been mentioned, the issue about extra police and resources. We were promised 20,000 police officers back onto the streets in the general election last December. We have lost 991 police officers from Essex police force since 2010. And of course, if the government is to come good on their promise, then we should have all 991 back on our streets before long. So it'll be interesting if we do bring the police commissioner here to get an update from him on just where we are on replacing those 900. Any member wishing to say anything else at this point. No one is indicating, so Owen, thank you to you and to Mr. Larkman for the report and for the conducting of the budget exercise, and we will be back in December on the draft service budgets. Agenda item 8 is the consultation on reforming local government exit pay. This is set out on pages 65 to 94, and Mr. Young is on the line to introduce the report and then take questions. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Chairman. Committee, this report seeks approval for a response to a government consultation that has the impact of changing the local government pension scheme regulations. Government has already agreed a set of regulations that have the impact of limiting payments to local government staff who are exiting employment, and they cap those arrangements at £95,000, which is a lot of money. And that 95k includes all contractual payments and all pension related costs. There is therefore a gap at the moment between what the pension scheme says and what the law says in relation to exit payments, and therefore the government is consulting on changing the pension scheme. Attached to your paper at page 89 is the draft response to the government's consultation, and I just wanted to draw the committee's attention to a few parts of that draft response. We've included some introductory comments raising our concerns about the disproportionate impact of the proposed changes to the pension scheme on female employees. It's no doubt that publicity that surrounded the introduction of the 95k cap was aimed at senior employees and high earners. Our analysis demonstrates that the actual impact will be on staff who are far further down the pay structure and who have a high length of service. So posts which are as low as band 6 might be senior administrators or junior supervisors or frontline staff who have given service to Basildon Council over a long period would be caught by these regulations if aged over 55. And our analysis shows that we have a higher proportion of female employees in those categories than men. So we've made that point in the consultation response. We've also responded to a number of technical changes which are proposed to the discretions that are operated in the pension scheme. And Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions on the proposed response and our approach towards it. The deadline for response to government is the 9th of November.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Does any member wish to speak on this item? Councillor Sullivan, are you waving at me or are you losing your arm? You are, yeah, okay.
First of all, just a question of clarification. Now, I don't work in the public sector, I work in the private sector. So it says throughout the response, it refers to the strain cost. Could you just give me a sort of clarification of what that actually means for the uninitiated? And then, Chairman, I'd just like to come back with a couple of points, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, strain costs just relate to the cost of somebody accessing their pension earlier than the actuary would have estimated. So if an employee is made redundant at age 55 or over, the pension scheme provides that they will have access to their accrued benefits. There is an opportunity cost because the pension scheme would assume that that employee would be in employment to their normal retirement age, and therefore there is a lost income to the pension fund, and that is referred to as the strain on that person receiving their pension early.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan.
Yeah, thank you. In that case, then I wasn't familiar with the terminology, but in a pension at a previous firm that I worked for, basically, if you take your pension any number of years before your retirement age, then you would lose, I think it's 4% per year if you took it early. So I think then that strain cost appears to be something that is common in the private sector, at least for those with those who've still got final salary pensions. I would just like to point out that the Conservative group wasn't involved in the compilation of this response. And I'd also like to suggest that in places, some of the language in here in this response is quite emotive. So on top of page 89, it seems highly inappropriate to be considering fundamental changes at this time. And then when you go to page 93, the third paragraph from the bottom, again, it is more than disappointing that none of this was available ahead of the present paper. It is also surprising, even maybe offensive to those affected, that HMT went ahead with its proposed regulations, changing the law with regard to the LGPS before responses to this. Well, when Gordon Brown stopped private sector pensions from claiming tax credits and thereby taking £4 billion away from private sector pensions when he first became Chancellor in 1997, it meant that the private sector pensions, which in this country were one of the best funded in the world, then within a few years, all of the final salary pensions were being closed down. I don't recall then anyone being consulted ahead of that coming in, or people asked to be if they were offended or not. So I do not think, as I said, some of this language in the response is appropriate and is too emotive. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member wishing to speak on this? Councillor Baggott.
Just really a question initially. Who has been involved in the production of this response?
So the response is done by officers, and then it comes to this committee for exactly this purpose, for us to feed into it and for us to provide challenge. So if what Councillor Sullivan has just said is a challenge, then that can be reflected in the amending of the report. So this is an opportunity for members to do that.
Okay, no, thank you. Because yes, I would concur that for a council response, it looks as if it's been written by one of Keith Starmer's team, and that isn't a good look. The whole point is for a council is to be apolitical, and there is a lot of emotive language contained within it. I'll also point out when it comes to the pension strain cost, I mean, the whole point of and working pensions, the whole point about someone taking early retirement is that there's an actuarial calculation which reduces both the commutation value of the pension as well as the amount of pension that's available. And the job of an actuary managing a scheme is to ensure that that commutation figure and those reductions in the income actually marry up with whatever the strain cost is of the lack of income coming into the pension fund, so that it becomes neutral. So there really shouldn't be a strain cost if the actuary is doing its job. In fact, if anything, the bigger hit on a pension fund, and this is something that that Essex have had issues with for the last 2 decades, is that with people living longer, it's people that actually retire on their full benefit and then live well beyond what used to be the age that folk expected people to shuffle off the mortal coil. And that puts a real cost onto the scheme itself, because they're paying out a longer amount of time for a lot larger amount of people. And it's actually predominantly funded by those workers that are actually still working within the scheme. And those workers shrink because we've seen a real shrinkage of people working within the public sector. So that's a bigger factor that hits on the viability and the cost of a pension fund than what should be any strain cost. So I'm also just curious that the council are sure that they've got their facts right when they start talking about the strain cost.
Thank you, Councillor. Stuart, do you want to come back on anything there?
Yeah, I just want to differentiate between a funded scheme and unfunded schemes. So I believe that what much of Councillor Baggott is referring to is both final salary and career average schemes in many different areas of the public sector are not funded, and that does mean that existing the employees that are left carry the cost of strain to that scheme. The local government pension scheme is a funded scheme. It's one of the only funded schemes in the country, and that means it operates with an actual monetary value in a fund, which is administered on our behalf by county. Strain payments into the fund are a replacement for the monies that fund would have expected to have invested over the course of the remaining tenure of an employee's employment. There is an actuarial reduction to the employee's benefits from taking it early. It is, the strain fund is not to make up the difference and pay the employee more. It is to recompense the fund itself, because it is a funded actual sum of money. And often those two things are conflated when people look at strain costs in the industry. I think I take the point about the nature of the language, and we can have a look at that. One of the points that we're trying to stress back to the ministry in putting forward this consultation is that by introducing the salary cap in advance of changes to the pension scheme, they have left the public sector and local government in particular in a precarious legal position, in that people who are made redundant over the age of 55 now, and those regs come in from the 4th of November. So at any time from the 4th of November, an individual will be able to claim their rights under the existing scheme, because this consultation runs till the 9th and then has to move through the legislative process itself. So some of the strength of language in here is to pick up the point that we had as a sector raised that risk to government and civil servants repeatedly, and yet they've decided to press ahead with a differential timetable for the implementation of this change.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McGarren.
Yeah, well, very interesting, as always. I think the Conservative members have made their position quite clear. So whilst they occasionally thank council staff for the important work they're doing, when push comes to shove, this is how they want to treat them. So I hope all council staff take note of that. On page 92 of the agenda, towards the bottom, it makes you know, and Stuart's made the same point. You know, the received wisdom about this is that it's all about stopping people going out with wheelbarrows of cash. You know, see chief executives and very senior officers. But actually, if you go back a couple of pages, on page 90, and look at case study 1, it isn't the case at all. This is about penalising people who have worked hard for the council, most if not all of their careers, on average or lower than average incomes. That's what this is about, you know. And it's an easy hit, because if you dress it up as we don't want people going out with wheelbarrows of cash, and you throw in the private sector argument, all the rest of it. But the fact is, if you're 55 or older, you are screwed. You know, if you're in your if you move the goalposts about redundancy rights and pensions, if you're in your 20s and 30s, there may be some possibility of mitigating it. If you're over 55, there is absolutely none. So if people in this position had known this was coming, they may have made different career decisions. You know, on page 91, the case I've described, in the scenario where she would take a full statutory redundancy payment, a full pension circa 23,000 per annum, and lump sum of circa 30,000 would reduce by 10,649 per annum, 46.3%. Does anyone believe that is reasonable? Really? Because I'd love to hear why. And I don't get the point about it. Yeah, you know, I don't think the language is a problem. I'm an emotive guy, some of you may have noticed, but I don't have a problem with it, because it's a frigging outrage what is being proposed here. And it's our staff who have worked hard to get us through the last 6-8 months who will be absolutely penalised by this and have no recourse. So well done, the Conservative government again.
Thank you, Councillor McGarren. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, just to come back, I think if Councillor McGovern spent more time listening to what was being said rather than planning his political soundbite, we'd get a different response from him. Because I'm not too sure how it can be that asking some technical questions of clarity on a report and saying that the language might be better posed a little bit differently, because sometimes, you know, you can write whatever language you want, and the response you get in any communication is what's fed into what has been received. So suggesting maybe that the language could be a little bit more temperate.
You support the changes.
And using that as some sort of potential pretend attack that the Conservatives are against the hard-working officers of this council is nothing other than scandalous. Then I don't expect anything less from Councillor McGovern. You know, he's delivered exactly what one would have expected. From our point of view, what we've said is that as far as this report is concerned, you've answered the technical questions, and I thank Mr. Young for doing that, that the language could be a little bit more temperate. And on the whole, we have no issue with the actual direction of travel of the report. It's the temperance of the language that is where we're coming from. And maybe if Councillor McGovern had listened, he'd have picked that up.
Okay, all right. I think I mean that was neatly rowed back there, because I definitely agree entirely with what Councillor McGovern has said. You know, it wasn't so long ago that on this committee we sat here and we were talking about LGR, and we were talking about how this was such the wrong time to start LGR and such the wrong time to talk about councillors, you know, potentially sacrificing their own roles and their own jobs, and yet snuck underneath the radar here whilst councils are being inundated with issues and requests to respond to a pandemic is the daylight robbery when it comes to the pensions of a great many of those staff who are doing, as Councillor McGovern has said, a hard day's graft, not for mega bucks, because that's never been the reason that people serve in local government, and they're now being penalised hugely. So, you know, in many respects, when you see, and as the case studies show there, when you see what is actually being proposed by the government, I would argue strongly that the language is probably a bit too tame, if I'm being completely honest. So I think we're probably in a happy equilibrium, and maybe Keith Starmer, whoever Keith is, might be able to understand a bit more about.
He's Sir Keith, apparently.
He is indeed. He is indeed. Anyway, we have exhausted this item. No other member has indicated on this. So I thank Mr. Young for the report and for members for their contributions. Those contributions have been noted by officers. The committee is asked to approve the response on page 65. So if I can ask members to unmute themselves, we will vote on.
Point of clarification, Chairman. We're being asked, you said earlier that the point of this report coming to this committee was so that any input could be given to it prior to it going. You're now saying approve the report. Are there going to be any changes made, or are we agreeing it? What exactly are we now agreeing to, given that there has been a suggestion with regard to just how and the style of the report's being written?
You are an experienced member of this council.
I am, and that's why I'm asking you the question, because you're lacking clarity, Councillor.
Well, there is a process. I haven't heard any amendments being tabled. I've heard comments, but I haven't heard any amendments being tabled. So, as I've said previously, you think it's too strong. We think it's arguably a bit weak. There's a happy equilibrium there in terms of what the committee is arguing for. But on the substantive points that are being laid out in terms of responses to the policy instruments, there is no, I'm hearing there is no argument from the committee over what they say. I'm not going to get into line by line analysis of what words should come out when and where.
Well, that's good, because it's not your report.
Well, there you go. So it would be.
So I'm asking Mr. Young. I've asked Mr. Young a question.
Well,
whether or not what his view is of how the report might be amended or
Mr.
not.
Young has heard the debate tonight, and the committee is approving the response, and he can go away and he can make minor amendments, minor changes if he sees fit. Councillor Sullivan, you are, I believe, waving at me, but I can't really see half your head.
Yeah. Chairman, just to add to that, I mean, if you know, for the sake of you know, presenting a united front on this, we'd be prepared to support it, as Councillor Baggott has intimated. Just if we could have an assurance, or if necessary, we would have to amend the recommendation to say that some of the not intemperate, but some of the language is toned down. And that's all we're asking. I think it's a very simple thing. We're not asking for a change in any of the factual content of it.
Okay, we'll move on.
So if I need to move an amendment, then can I move an amendment?
Move an amendment.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So my amendment is the week's committees asked to reprove blah 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 under the condition that some of the language within it is moderated. Some of that, yeah, is that the language within it, some of the inappropriate language within it is moderated.
Okay, well, that seems very well thought through. Do you have a seconder for that amendment?
Yes, I'll second that.
Very good. Let's unmute ourselves and we will put that amendment as it is to the vote. I vote against. Councillor Smith?
Against.
Councillor Brown?
Against.
Councillor McGovern?
I think it's outrageous to accuse senior officers of using inappropriate language. You can say that about me, that might be justified. Again.
Councillor Baggott?
For.
Councillor Headley?
For the reasons explained in my declarations of interest, I will not be voting on any of this. I will be abstaining throughout. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Sullivan?
Without speech, for.
Very good. The amendment, such as it was, has been lost, in which case we're going to go to the recommendation that is set out on page 65 of the report. I'll ask members who are voting to unmute themselves. We know Councillor Headley is abstaining on the vote. So, Councillor Smith, how do you vote?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGovern?
In favour.
Councillor Sullivan? Sorry, Councillor Baggott?
Abstain.
Councillor Sullivan?
Abstain.
And I vote in favour. So the recommendation is carried. Solidarity with all those who are being screwed over by this government. Thank you, Mr. Young, for that report. Agenda item 10 is the development of new ambulance hub on the Nevermain, and this is set out on pages 103 to 110. I would say before asking Tomasz to come in on this, and we have Mr. Humphreys on as well, who can answer technical questions on this. There are an experienced group of councillors on here. I'm confident we can dance around part two information. If any historic information is to be debated tonight, I would ask members to do that so that we can remain in part one whilst we debate this. The proposals are set out in the report, and we are asked tonight to give approval in principle to support the East of England Ambulance Service to develop a hub on the site, and also to look at the covenant which is on the site at the moment, with a further report to come back to the committee for approval. So this is a report to look in principle at the idea being presented. Paul or Tomasz, which one of you is going to present this to start with? Tomasz, is that you?
Yes, it's me, Chair. I'm more than happy. I've got a couple of slides there that I'll quickly run through. I'm not going to labour on them. I'm assuming everybody's read the report, but I'll just give you a little bit of context and location as well. Okay, I'll share my screen if I may, Chair.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Yep.
Can everybody see that?
We can see that, yeah.
Okay, excellent. I'll run through. So the report is as per set out by the chair, pages 103 to 110. A summary of the report is outlined by the chair, but just a little bit of a further perspective. I'm just emphasising that part two because it's quite core and central to the principles of this report, so we don't wander into anything, just to safeguard members on that. But it's all about creating a new hub facility for the East of England Ambulance Service and to improve the health outcome for residents of the borough. And it also benefits the recent approval of the Regen strategy, which you'll see in a very short period of time. So just for orientation purposes, as you can see, left-hand side, outline of the plan with the red line. And there's the overhead aerial picture to the right, just with some location factors adjoining the hospital and the golf course. And you can see how this site sits, just to give you a little bit of orientation on there. Obviously, the sites are just over about 4.5 acres. There are quite a number of issues regarding the site, in particular for creating this, such as some local issues with the trees to certain boundaries, access points which would need to be defined through the due diligence, which I'll cover in a moment, and also how it sits in relation to the adjoining residential area. So just brief history set out in that slide for you. Acquired in 2017. Originally, as members will be aware, it was proposed for a hotel development, but as I mentioned, there are habitat issues within the site, all of which can be addressed through due diligence, I'm sure. But the main one that would need to be assessed is the highway, because a new access would need to be constructed. And there's also a title restriction, what we call a restricted covenant, which benefits Essex County Council, and that would need to be addressed as well, but can all be covered in as part of the agreement. So the red block on the photograph that you can see and the aerial above indicates where the current ambulance station site sits, and the idea on that, which is just to the north of the current post office depot, would be arranged on an option agreement for the council as and when the facility were provided, and we would be in a position to acquire that as well. And that would fit and quite well with the proposed regeneration strategy of knitting the outer ringed area further. Just to give members an appreciation of it is a national initiative in terms of the Make Ready program that the ambulance service has been bringing forward. And there's lots of examples around the country, one in particular in Chelmsford, which members may be aware of. But it will provide a modern base for the service and crew, and they'll be operating with a significant number of crews there to service the area. But one of the key points to bear in mind, it needs to be in close proximity to the E&E, hence the previous aerial picture of its location to the hospital, and it's in a better location than where it is currently. It would need approximately 2 acres ready for development with good access to highway, and that is what the site offers. The conditions of it is the ambulance service don't have a site themselves. They can't gain access to capital funding, but they can to revenue, so they could provide that to us. And they don't have the expertise or resources to develop the new hub themselves. So therefore, under this proposal, the council would act as the developer, probably similar to the cinema project that members will be familiar with. We would procure all the necessary expertise, etc., as you can see, to meet the specification. And on completion, the ambulance service would take a lease from us, and they would pay us an annual rent, which would cover all our borrowing and interest and principal costs. Just a few other points to bear in mind. The access solution is one of the key factors that would need to be carefully designed, and it would have to be in tandem with the Highways Authority. But the whole point of this, as we've had discussions with ward members, and is to make sure that there is little disturbance to adjoining owners, and particularly the residents. We'd also need to make sure that there wasn't any conflict. Although there could be other uses provided, we just need to make sure that the principal use of the site, such as the ambulance service, was the key focus here. And as I mentioned earlier, we would be able to take an option on the existing Great Oaks ambulance site. So next steps, final slide here, members. These are the key due diligence that we would need to undertake. Site surveys, planning, highways. We do all the detailed financial modelling. We do the detailed local consultation. There would be formal discussions need to be had with Essex County to release the restrictive covenant, which they've indicated in principle. And we would come back with a detailed report to yourself, setting out the terms and costs, etc. So it's on the final point, members, just to give authority as per the recommendations as outlined by the chair. I'm happy to take any questions. Both myself and Paul Humphreys are available to cover any of those points. Thank you, members. I'll take this down if that's okay.
Yes, please, Tomasz. Thank you. Brilliant, thank you. Members, can I ask to see members who wish to indicate to speak on this item? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, I'd like to ask a few questions of clarification, and then following that, depending on the answer I get, I'd like to make a further point.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so it mentions in the report that we would negotiate a lease with regard to the land. Could the officer tell me over what period is that lease, over how many years? Secondly, it mentions that we will get a rent and that the rent will give us an income from it over and above the costs of the development. Again, can they tell me what sort of levels of rent, or indeed over what period of time it would take that they envisage to pay back our costs? And thirdly, who pays for the access road? Because the last Conservative budget put in £500,000 in the budget for the access road for a hotel there. Could you confirm if that £500,000 is still in there, and indeed will that be paying for the access road, and therefore will that also be incorporated in our costs that we would have to recoup? So if you could answer those first, please, and then I'll come on to the second part of my question. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm just aware that we have the monitoring officer on the line as well. It wouldn't be appropriate to get into specifics over commercially sensitive numbers or even high-level indicative costs at this stage, is my understanding. I don't know if either Tomasz or Paul has a... Tomasz, I'll come to you.
Yeah, if I may, Chair. Councillor Sullivan, I think the point is aptly covered, hence my sort of initial indications from the outset of the presentation. All I would suggest in order to answer the points made, the questions asked, should I say, is that it's all subject to financial modelling. Those various principal costs would all be factored in, and as I've indicated, we would come back with those detailed terms and points in a Part 2 report. I'm not at liberty to be able to express any of those responses at this point.
I agree with that, Tomasz. And before I bring you back in, Councillor Sullivan, I would also just put it on record that the proposal, or the principle that is being proposed here tonight, is to ensure that the council retains the freehold on the land, and I think that is an important point as well. That this is we're looking, as you've mentioned there, about revenue rather than capital on behalf of the ambulance service, if we choose to go down that route. Paul Humphreys, you indicate.
Sorry, without being able to go into specifics, Chair, that on the lease period, councillors, you'll be aware that borrowing costs for the council vary depending on how long the council borrows over. So initially discussions would be around 25 to 30 years, and that's likely to be the length done. As Tomasz says, ultimately the period will depend on borrowing costs at that time. So can't be more specific than that, but that's the sort of period of time for the lease. In terms of the rent model, as the report sets out, it's not a market rent arrangement. Rather, it's a payback of council cost arrangement. So whatever the final cost of the project, there will be a borrowing cost to the council of that. And it's why in Tomasz's slide, rent was in inverted commas, because the annual payment made by the ambulance service would reflect the total cost to the council, with, if you like, a margin on top of that, which would be to pay the council's costs of doing it. So it would be above, it would almost certainly be above open market rent for a similar sort of building. And sorry, the final point, Chair, was about the access road. The cost of the access road will be included in the project cost. So it would be the council would borrow that money to do that work at the same time as doing the other work, and then that would be included in that cost. And this will be part of a cost summary that's gone through all the time and kept open, so that the ambulance service can see exactly what the cost will be to ensure it meets their affordability cap, which is mentioned in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, before I go to the actual meat of the question, could Mr. Humphreys or Thomas just confirm, is that £500,000 that I put in the budget still there for the purposes of the access road?
If I can say, because Thomas may not know, it wouldn't be something that would need a specific budget now, because it would be part of the project budget going forward. So it would be a new capital project, and the money would be there. I mean, if there's a budget existing, then it would just simply be used, but it would be repaid through the project. It wouldn't.
Owen, do you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, at the moment that £500,000 is still in the capital programme. It hasn't been removed. So if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to see that provision is now coming to use, although not exactly for the purpose that we envisage it. The next point I wanted to make was on the budget meeting of 14th February 2019, when we actually made the provision for that £500,000 for the access road, Councillor Smith proposed an amendment to remove the £500,000 from the budget because, and I quote, until it has been fully scrutinised to ensure that it is truly the best offer available to Basildon Borough Council. Now, from what I'm hearing, and I understand that obviously they can't give us specifics at this moment, and you come back to us in part 2, but from what I'm hearing, it's going to be 25, 30 years before we get our money back, if we get all of it back. We are not going to utilise all of the land, so we've paid £1 million for this asset, but now we're not going to utilise all of the land as we would have done previously for the previous hotel project, but instead we're only utilising part of the land. So that therefore effectively means that part of that asset is now just going to go to waste. And the report also mentions that the town centre itself would now be regarded as the most suitable location for a hotel. Well, as we know, it is not in the administration's plans to put a hotel in the town centre. I haven't seen any plans for that. So I don't know how this has got in the report, and therefore this cannot be a consideration. So my question, Chairman, if I may, to Councillor Smith, is does he, in light of his amendment back in 2019, does he believe that this is value for money for the taxpayer? Because he clearly was concerned about it 18 months ago, the £500,000 provision. Does he really believe this is truly the best offer available to Basildon Council? Because from what I see, it is not delivering the Basildon Council what a hotel would have done had we have been progressed with that, and we would have attracted £12 million of inward investment. So my question therefore to him is, can he explain how this is a value for money for the Basildon Council? And if he makes reference to a pound shop hotel in his response, please can he define what that means?
Okay, I'll bring Councillor Smith in, and then I'll come back on some of the factual inaccuracies there. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just keep it short and sweet for Councillor Sullivan. I'm glad he's quoting me, because everybody agrees with that. It's a terrible waste of money. Now, I want to start off by referring to the independent Gerald Eve report. They're not interested in the politics of Basildon Council. They was asked to look at it. They made a professional report, and we paid them for that report. Now, they're saying the residual calculation of going ahead with the pound shop hotel would be £5,180,000. Who would have picked that up? That's the question. Who would have picked it up? And I'm betting the Basildon taxpayer. The land itself was £1,025,000. And there was going to be £500,000 to pay for the highway works. This ambulance scheme, we're still owning the land, we'll be recouping our costs and a little bit on top. And the taxpayer isn't going to be hit for £1,525,000. And according to Gerald Eve, a further £5,180,000. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, there was one thing I did forget. It was an unlawful tender that only one company was offered the deal for £1. And what would have been the cost to the Basildon taxpayer if other companies said, we would like to bid on that bid and do that, buy that land for £1? I forgot that, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, I think that's a very good point, because of course the contrast in what happened with the possible disposal of that land versus what is currently going on with the possible disposal of land under this administration is that there is, as you say, a full and proper legal process that is now being followed as a consequence of that. I take umbrage with this idea about the £500,000 in the capital budget. I think what we've heard is that there will be a far greater capital investment than £500,000 that will incorporate whatever is necessary for the highways improvements going forward. But the difference between this scheme and the difference between the previous scheme for the Pound Shop Hotel is that instead of the taxpayer being asked to foot the bill for A, the land, and then B, the highways improvements, and then possibly any extra money for the lifting of the covenant, and never ever getting any of that money back, and it all being at cost to the taxpayer. What Mr. Humphreys has described here is that all of that is incorporated into the lease period, and therefore the council not only gets back every penny it has paid on the land, on the changes to the highway, on the lifting of the covenant, and then on the development cost. It may even, as has been said, be charged out at above market rent. So there is the possibility that not only does the scheme now potentially wash its face completely, it actually makes a commercial revenue for the council. So there is a marked difference between our scheme and the opposition scheme, which is one of them is absolutely financially illiterate, and the other one is actually making money for the taxpayer, protecting the taxpayer's asset. And by the way, at the end of the lease period, the council still owns the land. As for what can happen on the other side of the land, that could come into commercial use as well during this period. And it will be for us to ask officers to go away and look at how it can be utilised. But the idea that at the moment it just stays there as a derelict piece of land, and that this phantom Hilton hotel, where even the leader of the opposition admits he never met the Hilton. The preferred bidder had never ever built a hotel previously, and that we were going to flick away such an important asset for the taxpayer for just £1. Again, I come back to it. You know, it was nonsense then. It's a nonsense now. This scheme, which has been properly thought through and developed, actually is economically literate. We are supporting our ambulance service. We are supporting our hospital, supporting the NHS, and therefore this is an entirely appropriate measure. It may even, as we've seen before, alleviate some of the pressure on the town centre traffic with the ambulances having to go down and then back up the Nevermain. It will mean that they have a quicker and easier route to the hub and then back to the A&E, so that will be a positive. And I don't think we should lose sight of the key thing also that Tomasz has said there, which is that there is yet another site in Basildon Town Centre that could come back into public ownership. And one of the key problems that we've taken through the regeneration strategy in the Town Centre Revival Committee is looking at this ridiculous situation where over 70 years, Basildon Town Centre has been hived off to private landlords and to private developers and to absent pension funds to be using facilities in our town centre that have prevented Basildon Council and by extension the public having more of a say and more control over what goes into our town centre. So again, that is a huge positive for the council, and we've worked constructively, I might add, with the ambulance service when it comes to the issues in Wickford with their land behind the Wickford police station, which Sempra has acquired and is bringing forward as well. So there are multiple things here. This £12 million of inward investment didn't exist. We should be really clear about that. It's phantom, and it was never going to happen. So here is a proper, well thought through, detailed proposal. We'll come back, we'll do it in part 2, we'll get the commercials all lined up, and then there can be an opportunity for the council to not only support the NHS, but to also have a commercially literate plan on this site going forward. I had Councillor Headley, I believe, wanted to come in at this point. I'll come back to you, Councillor Sutherland. After Councillor Headley, and now I've got Councillor Baggett.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to return to the report rather than go over the history of this particular site. I think anything that improves the ambulance service in Essex, let alone in Basildon, is to be applauded, particularly anything that would improve their response times. The site has a number of virtues in respect of its proximity to the hospital, but can I ask an open question of officers? If this development goes ahead, and I feel it probably should go ahead, are any discussions taking place with the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner to acquire the adjacent site, which is Basildon Fire Station? And I say that I've already declared an interest as a county councillor, but I was for 10 years chairman of the Essex Fire Authority before it was transferred to Roger Hurst. I think if we did develop out, as we are apparently planning to develop out large residential complexes, I think the last thing you want is fire engines at 2 o'clock in the morning going out on blues and twos and waking everybody up. I think at this early stage, there should be exploratory talks to do a similar project with the fire service and relocate the fire station, and perhaps, given the precedent that you are setting on this proposal, that you also borrow for their development costs and find them a site.
Thank you. I think it's lending itself, isn't it, more and more to this item on the work programme for the PFCC to come to the committee. So it's certainly another question. But Tomasz, I think you wanted to come back in on the point Councillor Headley made.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Councillor Headley. I'm sure members will be aware through the consultation process on the regen strategy over the summer months. We mentioned that we'd carried out various consultations via we made that, and also directly by officers earlier in the year, and subsequently we engaged with all of the public stakeholders, including the fire, police and ambulance and NHS, to explore and make them aware of our proposals, and we sort of kept them up to date and briefed throughout and shared and engaged and took on their views. So it is an ongoing dialogue that we have with them, and we will continue to do so because, as the regen strategy indicates, we are trying to knit the outer side of the town so that we move away from that moat and barrier that currently exists and link that into a more sustainable town centre, and find an alternative location with cooperation with the services. As you rightly indicate, Councillor Headley, that may have been appropriate in the past, but going forward, it's perhaps not the best location for those services.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomasz. Councillor Baggett, had you indicated?
I had, Chairman, thank you. I mean, let's be honest, taxpayers not even getting £1 for this. They're losing £1.5 million worth of assets and not even getting £1. It's interesting, quite startling, really, how Councillor Smith is the champion of the taxpayer till he gets his feet under the table. You said that it's well thought out, that it's properly thought through, it's economically literate. And yet, you know, officers have said that there's no financial plan, there hasn't been any work done, they don't know the answer to how much it's going to cost, they don't know how long it's going to take before any money would be recouped, they don't know, well, they don't know anything, and you wouldn't expect them to, because as they said quite rightfully, they haven't done the work on it. So for you to say it's well thought out and economically literate is being a little bit like saying that, well, you know, it's going to snow at some point. Yeah, you'll be accurate, but nobody knows when. And let's be honest, what you're actually asking this committee to approve, you're asking to approve the principle to make something available where you don't know what the financials are, you don't know what the consequences are, you don't know what the tipping point is for us as a council to make a profit, you don't know whether or not it will stack up, you don't know how much it's going to cost to actually move the highways, you don't know anything. And yet you're asking this council and then this committee to approve an in principle decision. Well, no. What you should do, councillor, in my opinion, is get the financials, get your facts right, present a cogent argument why it is that it stacks up, why it's good for residents, why it's not a waste of £1.5 million worth of assets, and what sort of the turnaround time is for this council to actually see a profit from it. And then, quite rightfully, you would have something that's economically literate that we could subscribe to.
Okay, I'll bring Thomas back in a moment before Councillor Smith. I mean, you are right in the sense that the public are not going to get £1. They'll get millions, which is in vast contrast to the one that you put forward. Thomas, you wanted to come back in on this.
Yes, if I may, Chair, just to help members. Essentially, we have done some work, but obviously, as I keep highlighting, I can't go into the detail because we'll stray into part 2. But we're just seeking the principle which will enable us to come back with all of that detailed information that correctly Councillor Baggett is highlighting. But that is the point of this approval that we're seeking, so that we can engage with those discussions and come back and present a full report for all members to consider, and then you can vote and take a decision on that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I'll come back in a moment. I think the purpose is, this is about being open and transparent. This is not about cabinet members hiding away in rooms away from public eye and public scrutiny and then coming back and presenting a fait accompli. This is actually about the council asking members from different political parties and none if the principle of what the council is suggesting is something that is palatable. And of course, we can come back and we can do it relatively quickly. I would suggest we could come back with that report in December or January's meeting, where we can present the financials to members, and I'm sure that will give comfort that the deal stacks up. And not only does it stack up, it goes well beyond what was previously on the table, which would have at the very least have meant a £2 million loss to the taxpayer. But as has been pointed out, that could have risen to as high as £7.5 million as well. So I think we're happy to do it. But the principle is here that this administration is being open and transparent, both with members on this call and with the watching public, about what it is that is being proposed on a taxpayer land up on the Nevermain, and I hope that people can see that is a far more proactive and positive way of doing business than coming back to committees and presenting a fait accompli, which has been previously the case under the old cabinet system. I think, Councillor Baggett, you wanted to come back before we go to Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and this is an easy way, because I like to keep an open mind before I vote on something. You made the statement that this is going to bring the taxpayer millions. So obviously, you know. Can I get that confirmation, therefore, from the officers that this project is going to bring the taxpayer millions?
Yes, you'll get that when we come back.
No. Now, can I have that? You said it's going to. The officer, you know, obviously more about it, that he's going to do it. The officers are doing the job. All I'm after now is an assurance from the officers that this is going to bring the taxpayers millions. You said it. Can I just have that clarification so we know how to vote, please?
You're right. I did say it. And I've also said, and as Thomas has pointed out, we will come back with the full finances, with the detail for you at the next meeting.
So you don't. So it might not bring millions then.
But you're asked tonight to vote on the principle. You're not asked to vote on the financials.
I'd like to know whether officers believe that it's going to bring millions. Do officers believe it's going to bring millions?
They'll tell you when they bring the report in part 2, when we can discuss the financials.
So you want us to agree a principle of something that now nobody will put their money where their mouth is?
I've already done that very publicly. So let me, all you're being asked tonight is, do you support the ambulance service, and do you support it as a position on the Nevermain. It sounds like your deputy is in favour and that you might very well be against. But we'll find
The
out.
report, Councillor, doesn't say do we support the ambulance service. The report says the principle of exploring an option to give a piece of land, which is the taxpayers, to the ambulance service, and you're making the claim that it's going to bring millions to the taxpayer. All I'm asking, given that you have such certainty, is for the officers that are actually doing the project and therefore have the experience, whether they agree with that assertion that it's going to bring millions to taxpayer. Now, that's a simple question, yes or no. And if Tomasz says yes, you have my 100% support and I'll be sticking my hand up for it. But if the answer is, well, actually, I said millions, but nobody's willing to actually back me up, then you're not going to get the support.
Okay, well, that's on the Conservative groups. As we've said previously, the recommendation here says improve the principle of entering into an agreement with the East of England Ambulance Service to develop an ambulance hub on the site of Nevermain. We will come back, as we've said multiple times, with the financials that will show exactly what that looks like over the course of the next 20, 25 years, whatever the lease term is. But very clearly, there is a difference. Your scheme cost millions. The scheme that is being proposed will make sure that the money that has been allocated in acquisition of the land, in build-out costs, in changes to the road network, which totals millions of pounds, is washed its face and comes back to the council. And as has been said, above market rent. So we will go through that in December, but I look forward to seeing whether or not the Conservatives tonight are in favour of the principle of supporting the ambulance service. Councillor Smith, you wanted to come back.
Thank you. I mean, most of what Councillor Headley said, I agree with. And I think Councillor Headley missed out something in support of a member of his group. He spoke about we don't need to go over the history, and he's quite right there. But there's one bit I feel that needs to be brought up. When Homes England owned this site, they was going to put a very, very cheap and tacky hotel with a drive-through American-esque burger place. And how nice and how beautiful that part of Nevermain is. Well, most of Nevermain is, to be fair. In fact, all of it is. And Councillor Turner led the charge to buy the land from Homes England. He led the charge, well, I worked with him to stop that tacky hotel and that drive-through American burger place being put there. And I think Councillor Turner needs to be pat on the back for that, because it's easy to forget what the previous leader of this administration has done. We have spoken about the period that have followed it, and now we're talking about the period going forward. We now have the ambulance on the adjacent piece of land. I've worked with the chairman of the Friends of Basildon Golf Course, Mr. Mick Toomer, and of course Colin Jenkins, who runs the golf course. And I think having an ambulance station right next door to the air ambulance is an excellent idea. And I also think having a one-stop modern facility to keep more of our ambulances on the road is essential, especially in a regular winter. I mean, obviously, it's not going to have any benefit to this situation we have with COVID, but in the average British winter in the NHS, having an ambulance station across the road from the hospital will make such a difference in saving lives. Over the last week or so, I've dropped off nearly 500 letters to the people of the Bird Estate to let them know and just give them a general rundown of what the council is considering, and that there will be a public consultation. And the general view, well, to be fair, I've not heard anyone say to me, don't do this, but the view is good. As long as you've put earthbounds in to protect the people in Toucan Way, so they're not disturbed by the noise, it's gone down fairly well. And I look forward to the public consultation so my constituency, Nevermain, can express their views directly to the council and their officers. I've also spoken to Councillor Headley's indicated to speak, Mr. Chairman, and I've also spoken to the proprietor of Basildon Golf Course, Colin Jenkins. He's very interested in sort of using some of the land that can't be developed because there's TPO trees on this 4.5 acre site. So possibly we could come to some sort of commercial arrangement where we can keep these TPO trees within this 4.5 acres and have a range sort of golf facility, which can bring us into more money. I mean, it looks good. Obviously, we want to see the details in black and white. Then we can formally go ahead and approve it, subject to resident consultation, subject to full financial due diligence, and then, of course, the planning process. But as things stand now, I don't think you could put anything better on the site. Working with the hospital and the existing air ambulance, it's about saving people's lives, and it'd be really good for the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Baggott, one final point, and we'll move to the recommendations.
Thank you. I would like to move an amendment.
All right. Before you do that, I'm getting more people waving at me. So the people waving at me wanting to speak on the substantive. Councillor Headley.
Yeah, can I respectfully suggest, Chairman, that from what we're being told tonight, it appears that half the site will be developed out for the East of England ambulance. I've already alluded to the possibility of relocating the fire station. Would it not be possible in principle to enter into a similar agreement with Essex Fire and Rescue to co-locate on this site with the ambulance service? And you can prepare a paper with indicative costs of re-provision of a modern fire station within Basildon. You're already putting an access road in that would be suitable for heavy vehicles anyway. And I think that would probably help when you approach Essex over the covenant, that you're supporting two public services and not commercial enterprises. So could that be a consideration?
Thank you, Councillor Headley. I'm not sure if Thomas or Paul wants to come in at that point around. Paul, you're... And then Thomas.
Yeah, just to advise, the report indicates that there could be other additional uses for the site for that very point Councillor Headley's highlighted, and other members have as well. The overall site is just over 4.5 acres. The requirement for the ambulance hub is approximately 2. Even taking aside the some of the habitat and TPOs, there may be some scope there. I think it's just a matter of when we come back with the details on the ambulance hub, we can certainly explore those other options and advise members at the next appropriate committee, Chair.
Thank you. Paul, do you have anything to add on that? No? Okay. Councillor Sullivan first and then Councillor Baggott's amendment.
Well, I never did get the definition of a pound shop hotel, but I think a lot of the points have already been made, but I would just reiterate one and add a new one. I still believe that taking 25 years where we might get our money back as compared to our proposed project where we would get a 4-star hotel, and also the fact that most of the land would still not be utilised, is not value for money in comparison to the one that we put forward. And with regard to your argument about this being open and transparent, and this is why we're bringing it forward in this agenda, well, when we come to discuss the actual financials, of course, that will be in part 2. Now, our hotel proposal was in part 2 because it was discussing financials. Yet Councillor Smith was the one who said that we shouldn't have the hotel discussion in part 2 because it should be open and transparent. So when we come to discuss the part 2 financials, when this next comes to the committee, I'll be interested to see how he votes when we come to the part 2 committee vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith, very, very quickly, and then the amendment.
Just a point of clarification through the chair. What we're proposing is not unlawful. What you was proposing was unlawful. All elected members have a duty to whistleblow anything unlawful or illegal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baggott, your amendment, please.
Yeah, I mean, on reflection, I think Councillor Smith might want to reconsider the fact that he's accused officers of acting in an unlawful way at the council. He might want to actually reconsider his words on that. However, the amendment is as follows. A new number 1, which is that this committee supports the East of England Ambulance Service. You said it a number of times, so there it is. It's in black and white now. Obviously, all the others then become 2, 3 and 4 respectively. Number 2 stays the same, but after Nethermain, the addition is once it has seen the detailed financials surrounding the proposal, full stop. The other 2 paragraphs remain the same, and then the final one, which would be 5, is enters into negotiations with Essex Fire Service for exploring potential co-provision on the site.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder?
I'm sure I might.
Councillor Headley seconding. Okay, Fine. I think just to speak to the amendment before I bring up other members in.
Sorry, I thought Councillor Headley had indicated he wouldn't be voting on this one. Did I get that? If I've got that wrong, I apologise.
I think Councillor Headley can vote on this one.
Yeah, I don't need an apology, but I hadn't indicated that I wouldn't take part in this. My involvement with Essex Fire Service ceased on the acquisition of the service by the Police and Fire Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
I apologise anyway.
So in terms of speaking on the amendment, I mean, what I'm seeing here is typical of the Conservative group, which is delaying tactics. Let's kick this into the long grass. Let's come back again in a 3 or 4 months' time, and let's take a really good idea that the administration is putting forward and try and put the brakes onto it. So that's why they want us to come back again. We've already said, if we agree to do the work in principle now, it gives a mandate to Tomasz and his team to go away and to start producing the financials that can then come back to this committee, which is exactly what recommendation 3 on the substantive says will happen anyway. I note the point that Councillor Headley made around about the fire station, and I don't see the need to put that into a recommendation. Officers can be mandated to go and do that anyway, and to come back to us if there is a recommendation. But it should not fall apart because one says no and the other says yes. The proposal here is very clear on the hubs model that the ambulance service across the country is running, that they think that this can work on that site, and therefore I think we are right to proceed and to support them. So I don't support the delay in tactics included in here. I do support conversations with others, but it will be a question as to whether or not that is an appropriate site for the fire service. It will have to be a question about whether or not they indeed want to move in the first place. This is not about forcing them, and it can't be both or none. It should also be we should be able to progress the ambulance service given where we are in our negotiations with them already. So from my perspective, I would vote against that amendment. Does any member wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be voting against the amendment. What we are doing by seeking principles is that this council's finally learned, do not pick a fight with the people of Nethermain. It gets expensive. Look what happened with the plans to dump builders' waste on the golf course. Was that in excess of £1 million, the cost of the council? Then under with a former UKIP council trying to put a traveller site on the lands at the south of it, and then the Pound Shop Hotel. This council's finally learned, do not poke the bear in Nethermain because it will bite. That is why we're doing it this way, seeking the principles to be agreed so officers can formally engage in the work. I don't want to hinder them because you don't want to have to hire the sporting village in the middle of COVID with 800 people turning up. And you don't want to be fighting court cases you're going to lose. That's why we're going down this route the proper way. 2, I'm very keen to support Colin Jenkins in the excellent Basildon golf course. He's really turned that around. Why he never got that in the first place, I don't know, but Colin's doing a fantastic job. And if he can make the site the ambulance service cannot use into a possible range to expand his services, so in the post-COVID world, we're going to have a really attractive proposition and attracting people to the borough. That will be a wonderful thing. So respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I will be voting against the opposition amendment. I understand where they're coming from, but the bear we never ain't getting poked again.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. There are no further speakers on the amendment, in which case I'll ask members to unmute themselves and we will go around on the amendment. So I'll kick things off and vote against. Councillor Smith?
Against.
Councillor Brown?
Against.
Councillor McGurran?
Against.
Councillor Baggott?
For supporting the East of England Ambulance Service.
Councillor Headley?
For.
Councillor Sullivan?
For.
Thank you. The amendment is lost. In which case, we will take a vote on the substantive motion that is set out on page 103 of your reports. I will kick things off and vote in favour. Councillor Smith?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGurran?
Favour.
Councillor Baggott?
Against.
Councillor Headley?
Against.
Councillor Sullivan?
Against.
Very good. The motion is carried, despite what appeared to be support from at least one Conservative member, but nonetheless, we are where we are. Agenda item 11 is the Basildon Town Centre management. This report is set out on pages 111 to 113. I do just want to advise members of an amendment that I will make at the start, or a change that I will make at the start here on the recommendations. Just be forewarned as I do this, and that is when we talk about car park 2 and 12 in relation to BTCM, it also says in recommendation 3 here to approve in principle the taking of a long lease of car park 11 for the youth zone, which we are negotiating at the moment, and we're very close to agreeing that deal there. I would also just like to add into the recommendations, subject to agreement, and I'll send this to you, Karina, so you have the exact wording, subject to agreement with BTCM to allow early access to land required to develop the youth zone. Officers work with Onside, who are the charity responsible for the running of the youth zone, to commence completion of the contractual arrangements, enabling allocated capital funding of £300,000 to be drawn down to enable the design and planning application process to begin, with a report back to the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee on the 25th of November. So in short, I am proposing tonight that the council allocates the money that was already allocated in the budget, £300,000 to Onside tonight, so that we can get on with bringing forward the planning application on that site for the youth zone. This I will hand over in a moment to Tomasz, but I think this is important to understand. The Basildon Council, both through the regeneration strategy, the Town Centre Revival Committee, we have been very clear. Most people in Basildon think that Basildon Council owns all of the car parks in Basildon Town Centre. They think we own all of the buildings in Basildon Town Centre. And the truth is that we own very few buildings in the town centre, and with the exception of the car park that sits under the Bas Centre, we do not control and run the others. We have made a commitment as an administration that we are going to get on top of this weird anomaly, and that's the best phrase I can use, this weird anomaly that sees BTCM created to take control of these things, where sadly the marketing of our town centre, the incentives for people to come into the town centre have not been there. And what we are looking to do here through Tomasz and his team is to progress negotiations so that Basildon Council becomes the controlling shareholder in BTCM. So it is the council, and by extension the public and the taxpayer, that has far more control over Basildon Town Centre, which speaks directly to the principles that are in the regeneration strategy of taking back control of this town centre for the people of this borough. So this is a real landmark moment when it comes to the regeneration of Basildon Town Centre and the control that the council and its partners can have on it. And not to steal too much of the thunder, I'm sure, of Tomasz and the team here, but I want to say it is testament to where the regeneration team are with the town centre and the guiding principles of that regeneration strategy, that partners and other landowners in the town centre are even coming to the table to talk to us in these terms. So it is a real statement of intent, not just from Basildon Council, but from partners as well. And as we've discussed previously at this committee, bringing a youth zone to provide facilities for all 8 to 19-year-olds and up to 25 for those with learning special needs education, that is a real positive for Basildon. It is around investing in a lifetime, not just for sport, not just for music, but life skills like writing CVs, a place to do homework, a place to learn, and counsellors and mental health support on site for young people as well. It's going to be a hugely positive thing for our borough. I'm very pleased with where the location is proposed, right in the heart of Basildon Town Centre, close to the train station, close to the bus station, great connectivity across the borough, and we should get on with getting this planning application in as quickly as possible so that the young people of this borough can benefit from that youth zone as quickly as possible. Tomasz, is there anything I have missed? Or Matt has joined us as well, and Paul. Tomasz, I'll hand to you if there's anything I've missed on this.
And that's fine, Chair. Thank you. Again, I've got a brief presentation which I'll just show the linkages to all of this as set out in the report, and it'll just help explain it in a very clear manner and emphasize the points that you've just made, Chair. So if I may, I'll just share my screen again and we'll quickly run through it. Okay.
Okay, we can see that. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll fire off. Again, referring to the agenda, pages 111, 123 for members' location. Again, summary of the report. It's not only about the town centre management aspect that you've highlighted, Chair, very eloquently, but it also highlights the linkages, not only to the youth zone, but also for a very important investment point for the council, which I know all members have been keen and supportive of this in the past, which is the Housing Infrastructure Fund project. They're all interlinked, and they will all sort of enable us to bring forward the ambitions and aspirations of all members in that respect. But it also links in directly to the regen strategy, which has recently approved as well. And again, as per the other report, it seeks an in-principle agreement to progress in line with the recommendations as suggested by the Chair, with a further report on more detailed terms and costs to come too. And again, I just please emphasise to members, we do not wish to stray into part two because there will be certain details here that we'll reserve for when we come back with a more detailed report shortly. So moving swiftly on, if I may. So BTCM set up, a bit of history there, 1987, changed 94. It was based on the principles from the previous corporation. It was based on share issues on retail floor space owned. And just as a bit of an example, the council only have 5%, which emphasises the point raised by the Chair, the assumption that we own everything we don't. And principally, BTCM manage the car parks and market, which are primary revenue generators for them. So whilst it may have set up following the Development Corporation to look after all the assets in the town centre, it has focused more so on the revenue generation from those car parks and market. We have, again, through members' support, managed to secure the majority of the public realm. I think there are certain exceptions there, which I won't go into, but there are smaller areas that are still retained by BTCM at this point. So coming on to the town centre management, I think what we'll need to enable us to progress with the regen strategy is that transformation. And it needs to be comprehensive transformation. And this came through from the consultation that we carried out for the regen strategy. And this was from the public, businesses, investors, including current developers who are coming forward with planning applications. And it was envisaged that it would support future residents and visitors and businesses. So it all is good, a good approach for the town itself. And it links into the glue and the aspirations that members have expressed, as well as the public and the business. So there are three options identified in the report, members. First one is no change, which we're not recommending, for the very point that has been outlined already. The second one is setting up a completely new town centre management organisation, but again, we would not recommend that because BTCM would still remain separate and it would still own the market and still own the car parks, which would have implications for two of the projects that I'm going to be referring to in a moment. And therefore, the recommended approach is that BTCM become the vehicle envisaged in the report, with the council taking a controlling interest over it. So the potential for that control, it would warrant redrafting the articles to give us the controlling shareholding arrangements. It would also enable us to, through a much greater consultation exercise, engage with all of the stakeholders, as outlined, not only just owners, retailers and businesses, but think of it from the leisure aspect with, you know, Empire Theatre coming in, as well as our own education with the college opening up from January, as well as the residential proposals coming forward through the Regen strategy. It also, we would ensure it remains financially solvent, and we'd also retain a function at arm's length company. There's a potential there to create a long-term interest body, such as a business investment district. So here's one of the first key projects that we need to progress, and this is essential to have this linkage with BTCM, because without it, we put the risk of the funding that we've secured, which has been supported by all members to date via Homes England, which is close to £10 million. And the very fact that is that we need the car parks that BTCM currently hold in order for us to bring forward this project, which is government funding. And I'll show you very quickly through the next slide as to where those car parks are. But there is a phasing proposed in order to bring this development forward, which is principally residential and provision of new car parking. So just to familiarise everybody, the aerial photograph there indicates where those car parks are, but in essence, what it would warrant is improvements to car park 1 to enable us then to release car park 2 and bring forward housing on there, as well as other benefits. Also, we would need to be able to bring forward car park 11, as outlined by the leader there, in respect of the youth zone, which I'll come on in a moment. And also enables us to move our current car parking requirements on car park 12 to car park 13. So there's a bit of a jigsaw pieces movement here, but it would enable a phased approach and enable the developments to come forward. So some key property transactions that would need to take place, as outlined, a license to enable that cosmetic improvement at car park 1, and that just makes it more secure. So that ties in with corporate objectives of making it safer environment for the town centre. That will encourage people to come and go. If you think about the new investment of the Empire Theatre coming forward next year, people coming to visit the town centre, that car park would be improved and people would feel safe coming into the town centre, at least that route. So that's a good thing. Conditional agreement to acquire the car parks 2 and 12 as mentioned, an agreement for a lease for a new car park of car park 2. Moving on to the youth zone project, as outlined, it's currently commuter parking. It warrants a lease agreement with BTCM. We would seek a long lease at an annual rental, and we would look to provide replacement of parking income as well. So it all works. All of this has been washed through and approved through the Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces Committee. So again, because of part 2, I'm not going to go into detail on that. Car park sites, just to help with the referencing, which shows you where car park 11 is. And therefore, overview of this, there are 3 different projects. They're all interlinked with BTCM. The greatest priorities has to be the HIF, and if members wish, the youth zone as well. The reason being is the level of investment and the benefits that both of them attribute. But all of this will be subject to due diligence, both property, legal and financial, and we'll bring all of these back to you just as we proposed in the earlier report. So final slide, members, next steps, comprehensive due diligence that you can see there, very extensive for all of the projects concerned, legal agreements as well as financial details that will come through because they are quite complex, but we will bring all of those details back in a future report to you for your consideration and vote. That's it, Chair. I'm happy together with Matt to take any questions as necessary from members.
Thank you, Tomasz. Members, if you could please indicate if you would like to come in on this item. Don't all rush at once. Councillor Headley, were you indicating then? No? Okay. Any member at all? Very good. Tomasz, you've obviously convinced in a way that I'm unable 7 members to support this, but I just come back to that final recommendation that I have added. I've sent that to Karina so she can see it, but this is to in essence approve the allocation of the £300,000 to Onside to start the planning application for the youth zone. You've mentioned there, Tomasz, about the HIF, which is a huge part of the regeneration strategy in and around the cinema, which we know, and then of course the youth zone is a particular issue, and car parking. For the first time ever, Basildon Council potentially could be in control of the car parks and have more of a say over what is going on in various sites across the town. So a really, really important landmark moment for the council as part of this regeneration. So given that no member is indicating, I'm going to move to the recommendations that are outlined on page 11, 1111 and 1112, which also includes, as I say, the approval to release that 300,000. Can I ask members to unmute themselves, please? And we'll move to the vote. I will kick things off and vote in favour. Councillor Smith?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGurran?
Favour.
Councillor Baggott?
Good to see your whips working. Against.
Councillor Headley?
Against.
Councillor Councillor Sullivan?
Against.
Okay. The vote is therefore carried 4-3, and the recommendations are carried, so including that fifth one, as I say. Thank you to Tomasz, thank you to Paul, to Matt. Apologies, Matt, for... Sorry, Tomasz.
Sorry, Chair, just if I could say, I just wanted to put on record, thanks to all the team that have been working on this, because they've done a sterling job for members, Chair.
Absolutely, completely agree. And as I say, the size of what we're doing here, particularly on that report, is not lost on me or the administration. That is a huge win. So well done to everybody, and I look forward to seeing where we go next with it. So thank you, Tomasz and the team. Agenda item 12 is to vote to exclude the public and press as defined because of the exempt information we'll be talking about, to protect the taxpayer and to protect the council's finances. So I'm going to ask members to unmute themselves as we vote on whether or not to move into part 2, and I'll start by voting in favour. Councillor Smith?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGurran?
Favour.
Councillor Baggott?
I thought Councillor Smith liked transparency. Against.
Is Councillor Baggott suggesting this is unlawful, like the Pound Shop Hotel?
Hang on, gents, please. Councillor Headley? Can you unmute yourself, please, Councillor Headley?
Against.
And Councillor Sullivan?
Against.
Okay, can I ask Democratic Services, in order to protect the taxpayer so that the taxpayer is not fleeced, can we please turn the recording off and the live stream?
Can you please make sure they don't hear what we're saying?